They say your home is your sanctuary, but what happens when strangers decide they control it? Imagine living peacefully on your own land only to have the HOA barge in, acting like they own every inch of your property. Fines you never agreed to, threats you never expected, and even police showing up at your door, all because of rules you never signed up for. The deeper I dug, the more twisted and petty their power plays became. Was this just harassment or something far more dangerous? Keep watching, because this fight turned into the HOA's biggest mistake ever. When I first moved onto my little ranch at the edge of town, life felt almost perfect. Wide open fields stretched in every direction, the air was clean, and for the first time in years, I had real peace. I wasn't in some fancy gated community or under strict neighborhood rules. This was my land, bought with hard work and years of saving, and I intended to enjoy every bit of it. Most mornings started quietly. Coffee on the porch, watching the sun climb over the fence line. A few neighbors would wave as they drove by, but for the most part, everyone kept to themselves. It wasn't exactly a tight-knit community, but it was friendly enough, and I liked it that way. Still, there was something about the area I noticed early on. A cluster of homes just a mile down the road had neatly trimmed lawns, identical mailboxes, and an eerie sense of order. They belonged to the local HOA, the kind of organization known for handing out warnings if your grass grew an inch too tall. I was outside their boundaries, completely separate, and I thought that meant I'd never have to deal with them. But the first signs of trouble appeared slowly. A stranger snapping photos near my driveway, flyers left in my mailbox that I hadn't asked for, and even whispers from other neighbors about the HOA president who didn't like outsiders living so close. At first, I brushed it off. After all, why would a homeowners association care about someone who wasn't even in their neighborhood? But little did I know that harmless distance would soon collapse, and my so-called peaceful ranch was about to become the center of a storm I never saw coming. The first real blow came on a quiet Tuesday morning. I walked out to grab the mail, expecting nothing more than bills and junk flyers. Instead, tucked between envelopes was an official-looking notice, stamped with the HOA's logo. My first thought was, this must be a mistake. After all, I wasn't a member. I had deliberately bought my property outside of their reach. But as I opened it, my stomach turned. The letter demanded that I correct violations immediately or face escalating fines. The so-called violations? My fence was non-compliant with community standards, my gravel driveway lacked uniformity, and my barn, my own barn, was an unauthorized structure. They even included photos of my property circled in red like I was some criminal suspect. I laughed at first because the absurdity seemed too much to take seriously. But 2 days later, a second letter arrived, this one harsher. Failure to comply may result in legal action. That phrase echoed in my head long after I'd tossed the paper on the counter. How could they threaten legal action against me when I wasn't under their jurisdiction? But that was just the beginning.
Over the next week, things escalated. A strange car parked across the road from my property for hours at a time, its driver snapping photos. My mailbox began filling with copies of community guidelines I had never agreed to follow. And when I confronted one of the HOA board members in town, she sneered and said, "If you live near us, you live by our rules, whether you like it or not." The arrogance stunned me. This wasn't just about lawn height or paint colors. It was about control. They wanted to extend their reach to claim authority over land they had no legal right to govern, and I was apparently their first target. At first, I tried to ignore it. I figured if I didn't respond, they'd eventually give up. But the HOA wasn't used to people ignoring them. Instead, their harassment doubled.
One morning, I woke to find a bright orange sign staked in my yard. Violation pending. Comply immediately. It looked official, almost like a government notice, but it was nothing more than an intimidation tactic. Later that same week, I discovered a fine slipped into my mailbox. $250 for failure to maintain landscaping. Landscaping. I lived on a ranch, surrounded by open land, and they were fining me as if I had let weeds overrun a suburban front yard. My frustration boiled into anger, but beneath it all was something worse: fear. Because as ridiculous as their demands were, the HOA had resources. They had money, lawyers, and connections. And if they were willing to falsify claims and trespass on my property just to intimidate me, what else were they capable of?
Things reached a boiling point the day a sheriff's cruiser pulled into my driveway. My heart sank as the officer stepped out, notice in hand. He told me the HOA had filed a complaint, claiming I was refusing lawful orders. I tried to explain that I wasn't even in their jurisdiction, that I had the deed to prove it. But the officer shrugged. "Take it up with them in court," he said, handing me the paperwork. That was the moment it hit me. They weren't going to stop. They were going to keep escalating, keep pushing, until I either broke down or gave in. I wasn't ready to surrender, but standing there with that notice in my hand, I realized the fight I was about to enter would consume everything: my time, my energy, maybe even my peace of mind.
And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, it did. Late one evening, I returned home to find the gate to my ranch wide open. My horses had wandered dangerously close to the road, spooked by something. I rushed to get them back inside, only to discover the gate latch had been deliberately cut. Someone had tampered with my property. Someone wanted to send a message. My hands shook with rage as I locked the gate again. Was the HOA behind this? I couldn't prove it, but who else had a motive? They had already trespassed, photographed my land, and threatened me with fines. Now it felt like they were willing to endanger my animals to make their point. My ranch no longer felt safe. The pressure mounted in ways I never expected. Neighbors who once waved now avoided eye contact. Rumors spread that I was refusing to follow the rules and bringing down property values. People whispered that the HOA might foreclose on my land, though I knew that was impossible. Still, the fear gnawed at me day and night. Everywhere I turned, it felt like the walls were closing in. I started documenting everything. Every letter, every fine, every photo of the cars parked near my property. I filed police reports about the trespassing and the tampered gate. I made copies of my deed, highlighting every line that proved I was not part of their HOA. Piece by piece, I built my defense. But just as I felt a sliver of control returning, the HOA made their boldest move yet. One Saturday morning, I stepped outside to find not one, but 3 uniformed officers waiting at my gate. They weren't there for a welfare check or a friendly chat. They were there with an order of compliance filed by the HOA, demanding immediate changes to my property or face seizure of assets. The sight stopped me cold. My heart pounded in my ears as I read the document. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was war. And as I looked into the faces of those officers, all I could think was, how far is the HOA willing to go to crush me? And how much am I willing to risk to fight back? The morning the HOA made their final move, the air felt heavy with tension. I knew they wouldn't stop after sending the police once, but I didn't expect them to come back with something bigger, something designed to break me for good. It started with the sound of engines. Not just one car this time, but several. I stepped out onto my porch and froze. 3 black SUVs rolled up, followed by another sheriff's cruiser. Out stepped the HOA president herself, flanked by 2 board members, smug expressions plastered across their faces like they had already won. In her hand, she clutched a thick folder of papers. She strutted up my driveway as if she owned it, waving to the police like they were old friends.
And then she said the words that made my blood run cold. "We are here to enforce compliance." The officers handed me another stack of documents, this time a court injunction. According to the HOA, I was in flagrant violation of community standards and had repeatedly ignored lawful orders. They were demanding that my barn be torn down, my fence replaced, and my land brought into compliance. And if I didn't do it, they were requesting permission to send contractors onto my property and bill me for the costs. It was the boldest, most outrageous move yet. For a moment, rage and fear fought inside me, but what the HOA didn't know was that I wasn't standing empty-handed anymore. I pulled out my own folder, copies of my deed, county records, police reports, and at the top, my own injunction, signed by a judge just 2 days before, an order against the HOA. The lead officer read it. His expression shifted from neutral to uneasy. My injunction proved beyond doubt that the HOA had no jurisdiction and that they had been filing false claims. For the first time, the president's smug smile wavered. The officer turned to her. "Ma'am, you have no authority here. Any further action could result in charges." The silence was electric. For once, the board was speechless. And in that silence, I spoke the truth I'd been holding back for months. "You trespassed on my land. You vandalized my gate. You lied to law enforcement. It ends today." The officers escorted the board members back to their SUVs. The president spat one last threat, but her words rang hollow now. She had been exposed. Victory didn't feel clean. It felt like surviving a war, because in many ways I had. And as their cars disappeared down the road, one question burned in my mind. If they could do this to me, someone not even under their authority, how many others had they already silenced into submission? That was the moment I knew this fight wasn't just about me anymore.
When the HOA president stormed off that day, I thought the worst was over. But instead of fading into the background, the story exploded. I hired an attorney and we filed a lawsuit, harassment, trespassing, abuse of authority. And slowly the tide turned. Neighbors whispered their own stories of being fined, threatened, bullied. One family over a tree, another over a shed. Then came the headline, "Homeowner takes on HOA overreach, not even a member." The town erupted. Board meetings filled with angry residents. People demanded accountability. The HOA, once untouchable, was cornered. In court, the evidence was undeniable. The judge ruled in my favor. The HOA had overstepped, lied, and harassed me. They owed damages, issued a public apology, and were barred from ever touching my property again. It was vindication.
Within weeks, the president resigned. The board collapsed. New members were elected, real homeowners, determined to end the petty tyranny. And me? I finally had my peace back. My land was mine again. No orange notices, no fake fines, no SUVs in the driveway. But I'll never forget the lesson burned into me. Power, unchecked, is dangerous. HOAs thrive when people stay silent. I didn't. And because I didn't, things changed. So I'll leave you with this. What would you do if strangers tried to take control of your home? Would you bow down or stand and fight? I know my answer, and it's why, no matter what comes next, I'll always look at my ranch and know this simple truth. It's mine, not theirs. And that's a battle worth fighting every single time.